That is unprecedented. Not only are they not willing to hold a vote at this point, they have refused to hold hearings on Judge Garland. And in some cases, Mitch McConnell and others have said, "We will not even show the courtesy of meeting with the judge to find out what he thinks." And I think what's important for all of you to understand, because you're going to be not just lawyers appearing in court. Potentially, but custodians of our legal system and our democracy is if you start getting into a situation in which the process of appointing judges is so broken. So partisan that an eminently qualified jurist cannot even get a hearing, then we are going to see the kinds of sharp, partisan polarization that has come to characterize our electoral politics seeping entirely into the judicial system. And the courts will be just an extension of our legislatures and our elections and our politics. And that erodes the institutional integrity of the judicial branch. At that point, people lose confidence in the ability of the courts to fairly adjudicate cases and controversies. And our democracy can't afford that. Our system is designed to make sure that this branch works. And it requires a broad consensus, even if we don't agree on any particular ruling. That the court's rulings itself are legitimate and consistent with our democratic design. And that's why this is so important. It's not just a matter of who is occupying that ninth seat in the Supreme Court. It has to do with how we, as a democracy, operate. And the particular authority that a court has to bring in order for our democracy to work. That was a really long answer. Others will not be as long. Professor Strauss, well, let me ask you about that, Mr. President. How did we get to this point? You hear sometimes that the problem is the Supreme. Court has injected itself into political issues, and so, of course, it gets enmeshed in politics. But the Supreme Court has been controversial almost from the beginning, from the Jeffersonians' attack on the Marshall Court, all the way through the impeach Earl Warren. Billboards in parts of the country in the 50s and 60s. And we haven't had this before. So. Do you have an explanation for what it is that brought us to this position? President Obama, I think there are a variety of explanations. First of all, it's important to underscore what you just said. And all of you law students, even if you're not critical, legal theorists, or what have you. I think just from reading cases, you will acknowledge that there's politics in legal rulings. When we make decisions about right, wrong, what are the rules governing our society, etc. That's an extension of our broader political and democratic conversation. Nobody is denying that. And you're right. There have been controversies in the past about how we should decide the balance between liberty and security. About how do we treat minority groups to assure that they are protected from majority rule. How do we make sure that the political process itself has integrity and that our votes count? Those are all issues where passions are real and people have opinions. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think what changed was when the Congress itself, and the Senate in particular, began to change. I think in some ways the judicial process is a casualty of some broader trends in our democracy. First of all, our politics have become much more polarized. There's been something called the Great Sorting because of gerrymandering. Because of how our media works, where folks either watch Fox News or they read the New York Times, but rarely do both. Positions get hardened and reinforced. Partisans carry more weight within each party. The notion of a liberal Republican or a conservative Democrat, those things broke down. And so politics itself got more polarized. That, then, fed into a culture in Congress in which basic comedy and habits of courtesy and process and institutional respect for people that you can agree with, those things began to break down. The filibuster, as I said, started becoming just standard practice. There's nothing in the Constitution that says every item that comes before the Senate is supposed to get a supermajority. It used to be that the filibuster, it doesn't have a very distinguished history, was used principally for blocking civil rights and anti-lynching and voting rights legislation. That was bad enough. It then suddenly became the norm for everything as minority parties. Started to decide that they wanted to block what the majority of senators were in favor of. And so all of this I think contributed to a breakdown of the process. Now, in fairness, Democrats are not blameless on this. If you talk to Republicans, they'll also often point to the Bork nomination as where this all started. And there have been times where Democrats used the filibuster to block what Republican presidents or conservative legal theorists viewed as eminently qualified jurists. I will say that there has not been a circumstance in which a Republican president's appointee did not get a hearing. Did not get a vote, and as a general proposition, they have been confirmed even where there have been strong objections. So what you have here is, I think, a circumstance in which those in the Senate have decided that placating our base is more important than upholding their constitutional and institutional roles in our democracy in a way that is dangerous. And there are other examples of it, but this judicial nomination process I think has become an extreme example. Professor Strauss, let me take you back a step to how to you're thinking about when you're making an appointment. And I'm going to try to put it in an historical context a little bit. You have presidents who really set out to reshape the court. And Franklin Roosevelt may be the clearest example. He was determined to find justices who would uphold New Deal legislation. Richard Nixon wanted justices who would limit the rights of people accused of crimes. And that's sort of one model. And then you have presidents who did not have any particular agenda. And I think President Eisenhower is an example. He appointed 3 of the great justices of the 20th century: Chief Justice Warren, Justice Harlan, Justice Brennan. But his appointees came from different backgrounds. No identifiable tendency in the way they thought about the Constitution. So do you see yourself as one of those models, or something different from both? President Obama, there's no doubt that in making my appointments, the values of the justice matter to me. And what I mean by that is not how they'd rule on a particular issue. In fact, we're very careful when I interview candidates not to ask them about a particular case or controversy that might make it seem as if I want a particular outcome. But what I've been consistently looking for, and this is what I saw in Justice Sotomayor. What I saw in Justice Kagan is people who, number 1, have intellectual integrity. And what that means is that they look at the facts and the law, and even if it's uncomfortable to them. They don't like the outcome, they follow the law, and they recognize that that's their job. Number 2, that they bring a humanity to the job. And what I mean by that is that, particularly on the Supreme Court, "9 out of 10 cases, well, certainly in the federal courts. "9 out of 10 cases we can probably arrive at an outcome. Just by applying basic tenets to constitutional interpretation. There's not going to be a lot of controversy. The cases that really matter are the ones where there's ambiguity, where there's a lack of clarity. Where it requires constitutional principles being applied in a way that is true to precedent. Is true to basic legal tenets, but also that understands the unique role of the court in making sure that people who are locked out of the political process, for example, are not permanently locked out, that they have some recourse. That we have justices who understand how the world works so that they are not entirely blind. To the history of racial discrimination or gender discrimination, or how money operates in our world. Not because that necessarily leads them to rule on a particular issue. But because it means that when they're looking at a tough case in which statute or the Constitution does not provide an immediate ready answer, that they can apply judgment. Grounded in how we actually live and the ideals and principles that have made this such an extraordinary country. I want them to have lived a little and be able to see the wide spectrum of people that they're going to be wielding this enormous power over. And so, a lot of times when I talk to the candidates for the judiciary, I spend time asking about their families and them growing up, and what were formative experiences in their minds. And in some ways, that reveals more than anything. And part of the reason that I think Merrick Garland would be such an extraordinary judge is not just because he's already been an extraordinary judge, but I think about his life story. And I mentioned this in the introduction when he was a high school kid. As class valedictorian, he's got a student speaking ahead of him who lambasts the Vietnam War. And parents are trying to unplug the guy's mic, and Merrick comes in, and not because he necessarily agrees with the student. But, impromptu, provides a vigorous defense of free speech. As a 17 or 18-year-old kid, that tells me something about him. It gives me confidence that this is somebody who's thought about what our core values and ethics are as a society.